There is one fundamental illusion that governs almost everything you think, feel, and do in this life. It is so basic, so taken for granted, that questioning it seems absurd. Yet this single misunderstanding is the root of all human suffering, anxiety, and the chronic sense that something is fundamentally wrong with existence itself. Most people never even realize they're living under its spell. The illusion is this: that you are separate from the world around you, that you are something called I, trapped inside a bag of skin, looking out at an alien universe that is fundamentally not you, that you came into this world from somewhere else, like a tourist who doesn't belong, that everything outside your skin is other and therefore potentially dangerous, unpredictable, and ultimately meaningless. But let me ask you something that might sound strange at first. When you say I, what exactly are you referring to? Most people, if they're honest, locate this sense of I somewhere behind their eyes, between their ears, like a little man in a control room watching screens and pushing buttons. You don't say, I beat my heart, or I grow my hair, because these things seem to happen to you, not by you. You experience yourself as the passenger of your own body, not its true nature. This is already peculiar, isn't it? That you should feel like a stranger in your own skin. That the very organism you call yourself should feel somehow foreign to the I that claims to live inside it. We've been so thoroughly convinced of this separation that we speak of having a body rather than being one. It's as if we're ghosts haunting our own flesh. Now, this feeling of separation doesn't stop at your skin. Oh no, it extends outward into your entire experience of reality. You feel separate from other people, separate from nature, separate from the cosmic process itself. You experience life as something that happens to you rather than something you are. When thunder rolls across the sky, you don't feel that you are thundering. When the wind blows, you don't experience yourself as the blowing. But here's what's fascinating. This sense of separation, this feeling of being an isolated fragment in a hostile universe, is completely artificial. It's a learned behavior, a cultural hallucination that we've mistaken for reality itself. Just as we've forgotten that we don't actually have thoughts, but rather are the thinking process, we've forgotten that we don't inhabit the world, but are a temporary expression of it. The universe doesn't contain you. You are what the universe is doing right here, right now. Think about it this way. How do you know where you end and the world begins? You might say at your skin, but that's arbitrary. Your skin is constantly exchanging atoms with the air around you. The food you ate this morning is now part of what you call your body. The oxygen you're breathing was recently part of a tree. The boundary between self and environment is not a wall, but a dance, a continuous flowing exchange that makes separation impossible. From the perspective of biology, ecology, or any science that looks at what's actually happening rather than what we think is happening, the notion of isolated individuals is pure mythology. You cannot describe the behavior of a living organism without also describing the behavior of its environment. If I tell you someone is walking without mentioning the ground they're walking on, I'm describing a body dangling its legs in empty space which isn't walking at all. The scientist who studies you discovers that you are not a separate thing, but a process, a pattern of activity that includes everything you normally think of as not you. Your heartbeat, your breathing, your thinking. All of these depend absolutely on processes you don't usually associate with yourself. The sun, the soil, the rain, the entire web of life participates in what you call your existence. You are no more separate from your environment than a wave is separate from the ocean. But we've been educated into ignoring this fundamental interconnectedness. Our very language tricks us into thinking in terms of separate subjects and objects, agents and things acted upon. We say, I think, as if there were some entity called I that does thinking, when actually there's just thinking happening. We say, It's raining as if there were some mysterious it that performs the action of raining when there's just raining occurring. This grammatical habit extends into our deepest sense of identity. We imagine ourselves as separate subjects confronting an alien world of objects. We speak of facing reality as if reality were something standing over against us, something we must confront rather than something we are. We talk about coming into the world rather than recognizing that we come out of it, like leaves from a tree or waves from an ocean. The consequences of this illusion are enormous. If you really believe you're separate from the world, then the world becomes threatening. You must defend yourself against it, control it, conquer it. You live in a state of chronic anxiety because you feel like a vulnerable fragment in a vast, meaningless machine. Every experience becomes either something to grasp at or something to push away because nothing feels intrinsically connected to you. This is why so many people today feel alienated, depressed, and constantly anxious, despite having more comfort and security than any generation in human history. They've been taught to experience themselves as isolated egos, competing for resources in a fundamentally hostile universe. No wonder they're exhausted. They're trying to defend something that doesn't actually exist against something they're actually part of. You see, the fundamental energy of life is not struggle but flow. When you watch a river, you don't see the water fighting against the banks. You see a dance, a continuous shaping and reshaping that includes both the water and its container. The river doesn't have banks. The whole system, water, banks, bed, surrounding landscape, is one unified process. In exactly the same way, you don't have an environment. You and your environment are one seamless activity. But our culture has convinced us that we must fight the current rather than flow with it. We are taught to oppose nature rather than recognize ourselves as nature. We imagine ourselves as separate agents who must impose our will on a resistant world rather than expressions of that world's own creative unfolding. It's like a wave trying to fight the ocean or a flame attempting to battle the fire. This misunderstanding creates the peculiar modern phenomenon of people who feel guilty about existing. Deep down, they sense that they don't belong here, that their presence is somehow an intrusion on a world that was getting along perfectly well without them. They apologize for taking up space, for consuming resources, for simply being here. But this guilt is based on a complete misapprehension of what they are. You are not an accident in the universe. You are the universe becoming conscious of itself in this particular location. You are not a separate thing that happened to appear in the world. You are what the world is doing right here, right now. Just as an apple tree apples, the universe peoples. Your existence is not a cosmic mistake, but a cosmic necessity. Without you, the universe would be incomplete. When this understanding begins to dawn, everything changes. You stop feeling like you're fighting for survival in an alien environment and start recognizing yourself as the environment becoming aware of itself. You cease trying to defend an imaginary separate self and begin experiencing yourself as the unified field of existence, expressing itself as apparently separate forms. The anxiety that comes from feeling isolated and vulnerable naturally dissolves when you realize you're not isolated at all. This doesn't mean you become careless about your apparent individual existence. You still look both ways before crossing the street, but you no longer carry the heavy burden of feeling like you're fighting against the world. Instead, you recognize that your individual life is the world's way of experiencing itself from this particular perspective. You're not in the universe. You are the universe being you. The practical implications of this shift are profound. When you realize that harming your environment is literally harming yourself, you naturally begin to act more responsibly. When you recognize that other people are not separate from you, but other expressions of the same underlying process, compassion becomes effortless. When you understand that your thoughts and feelings are not private possessions, but movements of the universal consciousness, you stop taking them so personally. Most importantly, you begin to relax. The chronic tension that comes from feeling like you must constantly defend yourself against a hostile world simply evaporates. You start to trust the process of life because you recognize that you are that process. You stop trying to control every outcome because you realize that the controller and the controlled are one seamless activity. This is not some mystical abstraction, but the most practical realization possible. Right now, as you read these words, your body is performing millions of incredibly complex processes without any conscious effort on your part. Your heart is beating, your lungs are breathing, your cells are repairing themselves, your brain is processing information. All of this is happening spontaneously, effortlessly, perfectly. This same intelligence that runs your body is running the entire universe. The question is, why do you trust it to beat your heart, but not to guide your life? Why do you have confidence in its ability to grow your hair, but doubt its capacity to unfold your circumstances appropriately? The same wisdom that knows how to turn food into flesh, how to heal wounds, how to dream dreams, is orchestrating every aspect of your existence. But we've been conditioned to believe that we must figure everything out with our conscious minds, that we must control and manage our lives through effort and will. This is like trying to walk by consciously directing each muscle movement, or trying to digest your food by thinking about it. The more you interfere with the natural intelligence that's already operating perfectly, the more problems you create. The beautiful thing about recognizing your fundamental unity with existence is that it doesn't require belief or faith. It's not a philosophy you must adopt, but a fact you can directly experience. Right now, pause for a moment and simply be aware of being aware. Notice that there's no separate you observing awareness. There's just awareness being aware of itself. This awareness is not located inside your head, but is the very space in which all experience arises. This awareness is not yours any more than the space in this room belongs to the furniture. The furniture appears in space, but space doesn't belong to the furniture. Similarly, your thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions appear in awareness, but awareness doesn't belong to them. You are this awareness itself, not something that possesses it. And this awareness is the same aware presence that looks out through every pair of eyes, that experiences itself as every conscious being. When you truly grasp this, the whole problem of feeling separate disappears. How can you feel isolated when you realize that the awareness looking out through your eyes is the same awareness looking out through everyone else's eyes? How can you feel disconnected when you recognize that the consciousness reading these words is the same consciousness that wrote them? The sense of separation was always an optical illusion created by focusing exclusively on the apparent forms and missing the underlying unity. This understanding doesn't eliminate the play of apparent differences. Waves don't stop being waves when they recognize themselves as ocean. Your personality doesn't disappear when you realize your true nature. But you stop mistaking the temporary patterns for your essential identity. You begin to experience yourself as the eternal consciousness expressing itself temporarily as this particular pattern of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. From this perspective, death becomes no more frightening than sleep. When a wave subsides back into the ocean, has anything really died? The water hasn't gone anywhere, it's simply taken a new form. Similarly, when the pattern you call yourself eventually dissolves, the consciousness you truly are doesn't go anywhere. It simply stops temporarily identifying with this particular configuration and remains as it always was, the aware presence in which all forms arise and subside. This is why mystics throughout history have described enlightenment not as gaining something new, but as remembering what you've always been. It's like suddenly recognizing that the character you've been playing in a dream is just the dreamer wearing a mask. The character was never separate from the dreamer. It was always the dreamer experiencing itself as that particular role. But here's the beautiful paradox. The moment you truly realize you don't need to seek for your true self because you already are it, the seeking stops. The chronic sense of something missing, something wrong, something that needs to be fixed or improved simply dissolves. You discover that what you were seeking was what was doing the seeking all along. The treasure you thought was hidden somewhere else turns out to be the very awareness with which you were searching. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop caring about life. On the contrary, when you're no longer driven by the compulsive need to defend an imaginary separate self, your actions become far more spontaneous and effective. Like a skilled jazz musician who has mastered their instrument so thoroughly that technique becomes transparent, you begin to live from a place of effortless spontaneity. You respond to life rather than react to it. The illusion of separation is maintained by the constant mental commentary that divides experience into me and not me, good and bad, right and wrong. This inner narrator creates the sense of being a separate observer of life rather than life itself. But when you begin to recognize this commentary as just another movement in awareness rather than the voice of your true self, its power to create suffering begins to diminish. You start to see that you are not the thinker of your thoughts any more than you are the dreamer of your dreams while dreaming. Thoughts simply arise in awareness, persist for a while, and then dissolve back into the silence from which they came. You are the awareness in which this process occurs, not any particular content that appears within it. This recognition brings immense freedom because you stop taking every thought so personally. The same principle applies to emotions. When you're no longer identified with the temporary patterns of feeling that arise and pass away in consciousness, you can experience them fully without being overwhelmed by them. Joy doesn't make you proud, and sadness doesn't make you depressed because you recognize both as temporary weather patterns in the sky of awareness. You remain as the unchanging witness in which all changes occur. This is not a matter of becoming detached or indifferent to life. Quite the opposite. When you're no longer defending a separate self, you become far more available to the full spectrum of human experience. You can feel deeply without drowning, love fully without possessing, engage completely without attachment. You discover that what you thought was vulnerability was actually your greatest strength. The one illusion holding you back is the belief that you are held back at all. You are already what you're seeking to become. You already possess what you're trying to acquire. You are already home in the place you're trying to reach. The journey is the destination, the seeker is the sought, the question is the answer. When this becomes clear, the search ends, not in finding something new, but in recognizing what was never lost. And in that recognition, life becomes what it always was, but you forgot. A spontaneous, joyful, creative play of consciousness exploring its own infinite potential through countless temporary forms. You are not a separate wave struggling in an alien ocean. You are the ocean itself, dancing as waves for the sheer delight of the dance. Now you might be wondering how to actually live from this understanding rather than just think about it intellectually. The difficulty is that our entire culture is organized around maintaining the illusion of separation. From the moment you wake up until you go to sleep, you're bombarded with messages that reinforce the myth of isolated individuality. Every advertisement tells you that you lack something essential and must acquire it from outside yourself. Every news broadcast reinforces the notion that the world is dangerous and you must protect yourself from it. But once you begin to see through this conditioning, you can start to experiment with living differently. Instead of approaching each day as a separate individual who must accomplish certain tasks to prove their worth, you can begin to experience yourself as life itself, waking up and wondering what it wants to explore today. Instead of feeling burdened by responsibilities, you can recognize them as opportunities for the universe to experience itself in new ways. Instead of dreading challenges, you can welcome them as the cosmos testing its own creative limits. This shift in perspective transforms everything without changing anything external. Your job remains the same, but instead of being something you must do to survive, it becomes a way for existence to express its creativity through you. Your relationships remain the same people, but instead of being separate individuals you must manage and manipulate, they become other facets of your own being, exploring different perspectives. Your problems remain the same situations, but instead of obstacles blocking your path, they become the path itself, teaching you what you need to learn. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it requires no special skills, no years of meditation, no exotic practices or beliefs. It's simply a matter of remembering what you already know, but have temporarily forgotten. You already know how to live spontaneously. You did it perfectly as a child, before you learned to doubt yourself. You already know how to trust the process of life. You do it every time you fall asleep, without worrying about whether you'll wake up. You already know how to flow with circumstances. You do it automatically when you're dancing or playing music or making love. The only difference is learning to recognize these natural capacities and allowing them to extend into areas where you've been trying to control outcomes through force and effort. When you're stuck in traffic, instead of fighting the situation with frustration, you can practice experiencing yourself as the traffic flowing exactly as it needs to flow. When someone criticizes you, instead of defending an imaginary separate self, you can listen to their words as the universe offering you feedback about how you're showing up in the world. When unexpected events disrupt your plans, instead of resisting change, you can welcome the opportunity to discover what wants to emerge. This doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to make efforts. A river doesn't struggle against its banks, but it certainly moves with tremendous force and purpose. A tree doesn't fight to grow, but it persistently reaches toward the light and sends its roots deep into the earth. The key is learning to act from flow rather than force, from trust rather than fear, from wholeness rather than fragmentation. When your actions arise from the recognition of your fundamental unity with life, they become effortless expressions of natural intelligence rather than desperate attempts to control an alien world. You'll notice that when you operate from this understanding, you make far fewer mistakes. This is because you're no longer acting from the limited perspective of an isolated ego trying to manipulate circumstances for its own benefit. Instead, you're acting from the perspective of the whole system seeking its own optimal expression. You naturally make choices that benefit not just your apparent individual interests, but the larger web of relationships of which you're part. You find yourself spontaneously acting with wisdom you didn't know you possessed. There's a quality of effortlessness that emerges when you align with the natural flow of existence rather than swimming against it. Problems that seemed insurmountable when approached from the perspective of separation often resolve themselves when viewed from the perspective of unity. Relationships that were filled with conflict and struggle begin to flow more harmoniously when you stop trying to change other people and start recognizing them as perfect expressions of the same consciousness you are. Work that felt like drudgery becomes a creative collaboration between you and life itself. But perhaps the most profound shift is in your relationship with time. When you're living from the illusion of separation, you're always somewhere else, either reliving the past or anticipating the future. The present moment feels insufficient because you're constantly seeking some better state that you imagine exists elsewhere. But when you recognize yourself as the eternal awareness in which all time appears, you discover that the present moment is not a platform for getting somewhere else, but the only place where life actually happens. This doesn't mean you stop planning for the future or learning from the past. But you do these things from presence rather than absence, from fullness rather than lack, from curiosity rather than anxiety. You plan, not because you're afraid of what might happen, but because planning is a delightful way for consciousness to explore possible futures. You remember not because you're stuck in what was, but because memory is consciousness, enjoying its own creative history. Living from presence transforms your entire experience of embodiment. Instead of feeling like a ghost haunting a meat machine, you begin to experience your body as consciousness made tangible. Every sensation becomes a direct communication from the intelligence that's orchestrating your existence. Pain becomes information rather than punishment. Pleasure becomes gratitude rather than grasping. Physical limitations become creative constraints that inspire innovative solutions rather than barriers that prevent fulfillment. You start to notice that your body has its own profound wisdom that operates far beyond the reach of your conscious mind. It knows how to heal cuts, how to balance countless chemical processes, how to coordinate millions of cellular activities without any effort on your part. When you begin to trust this same intelligence to guide your choices and shape your circumstances, you discover that life becomes much easier and far more magical than you ever imagined possible. The illusion of separation also creates the notion that happiness is something you must pursue rather than something you naturally are. When you believe you're a separate individual in an alien world, you imagine that satisfaction must come from acquiring the right external conditions, the perfect relationship, the ideal job, the sufficient amount of money, the best living situation. But these external conditions are constantly changing, which means any happiness based on them is inherently unstable and anxiety-provoking. When you recognize yourself as the awareness in which all experiences arise, you discover that peace and contentment are your natural state. They don't need to be created or maintained through effort, because they're what you are when you're not busy creating problems for yourself. Happiness stops being something you chase and becomes something you notice was always already present, like the sun that never stops shining, even when clouds temporarily obscure it from view. This understanding revolutionizes your relationship with desire. Instead of experiencing wants and preferences as evidence of your inadequacy or separation, you begin to recognize them as the universe exploring what it enjoys through you. Instead of feeling guilty about having desires or frustrated when they're not immediately fulfilled, you can appreciate them as part of the cosmic play of consciousness, experimenting with different possibilities. You discover that desire itself is never actually the problem. It's the belief that fulfilling desires will fundamentally change your essential nature. When you know yourself as already complete, desires become like games rather than desperate quests for salvation. You can play them fully without being destroyed if you don't win. You can enjoy the process of wanting without being tortured by not having. You can appreciate both getting what you want and not getting what you want as equally valid expressions of life's creativity. The same principle applies to all forms of seeking, whether you're seeking knowledge, experiences, relationships, achievements, or even enlightenment itself. The very act of seeking assumes that you lack something essential that exists somewhere other than where you are right now. But when you recognize that what you're seeking is what's doing the seeking, the entire game changes. You can still engage in learning, creating, relating, and achieving, but you do so from fullness rather than emptiness, from celebration rather than desperation. This shift from seeking to being transforms your relationships with other people in the most beautiful ways. When you're no longer trying to get something from others to complete yourself, you become truly available to enjoy them as they are. When you're not defending an imaginary separate identity, you can listen without reactivity and respond without agenda. When you recognize other people as other expressions of the same consciousness you are, love becomes effortless because you're literally loving yourself in countless different forms. You begin to see that every person you encounter is consciousness wearing a temporary costume, playing a particular role in the cosmic drama. Some are playing heroes, some are playing villains, some are playing wise teachers, some are playing confused students, but they're all the same actor behind different masks. This recognition doesn't diminish the uniqueness and beauty of each individual expression. It actually enhances it by removing the fear and judgment that prevent you from appreciating the full spectrum of human possibility. The illusion of separation creates the belief that you must earn love, deserve respect, and prove your worth through achievements and good behavior. But when you recognize yourself as the love that's seeking itself in all relationships, the respect that's acknowledging itself in all interactions, and the worth that's celebrating itself in all expressions, these become natural emanations rather than scarce commodities to be earned or defended. You stop trying to be somebody special and start enjoying being nobody in particular, which paradoxically makes you far more interesting and attractive to others. You stop performing roles to get approval and start expressing yourself authentically because there's no separate self that could be threatened by disapproval. You stop trying to fix or change other people and start appreciating them as perfect expressions of consciousness, exploring the full range of human possibility. Perhaps most importantly, you begin to understand that there never was anything wrong with you that needed to be fixed. The sense of inadequacy, the feeling that something was missing, the chronic dissatisfaction that drove you to seek happiness elsewhere, all of these were simply the natural result of mistaking yourself for something you're not. It's like spending your whole life trying to improve your reflection in the mirror instead of recognizing that you are what's looking at the reflection. When this becomes clear, not just intellectually but as a lived reality, the seeking stops. Not because you found what you were looking for, but because you realize you never lost it in the first place. Not because you've become enlightened, but because you remember you were never really ignorant. Not because you've solved the problem of existence, but because you see there never was a problem to solve. And then life becomes what it always was, but you had forgotten. A spontaneous celebration of consciousness, exploring its own infinite creativity through the temporary dance of form and emptiness, self and other, seeking and finding, losing and discovering. You are not the dancer, you are the dancing itself, eternally fresh, eternally new, eternally coming home to what you never left.